Dr. J. Raj's Literary Lens presents Part 1, After Theory, Lecture 5, Gaze Theory. This lecture is prepared and presented by Dr. S. Joseph Arul J. Raj, former head and associate professor of English, St. Joseph's College, Autonomous, Tiruchirappalli, Tamil Nadu, India. Introduction. Have the readers ever noticed how movies often depict women as beautiful objects to be looked at, while men are shown as strong and active? Or how some people feel uncomfortable when they are being watched in public? These experiences are connected to a concept called gaze theory. Gaze theory studies how people look at others and how this act of looking affects identity, power, and emotions. The word gaze does not just mean to look. It refers to a look that involves power, judgment, and emotion. Sturken and Cartwright 12. For example, a teacher's gaze in a classroom may make a student feel nervous, while a lover's gaze may make someone feel cherished. The gaze is often shaped by culture, gender, race, and social norms. In literature, the way characters look at each other, or are looked at, can reveal deep truths about power, identity, and society. This idea is central to gaze theory, a concept developed by scholars to explain how seeing and being seen shape human relationships, especially in stories. Originally rooted in psychology and film studies, gaze theory has become an important tool for analyzing literature. This chapter explains what gaze theory is and how it is used in literary works, with examples from well-known novels. The goal is to help readers understand this complex idea in simple language and show how authors use the gaze to explore gender, race, class, and power. What is gaze theory? The term gaze refers to the act of looking, but in gaze theory, it is not just passive observation. Instead, the gaze is an active force that can create meaning, show dominance, or shape identity. The idea began with psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud and was expanded by French theorist Jacques Lacan, who introduced the mirror stage in child development. According to Lacan, when a child sees their reflection, they form a sense of self, but this self is shaped by how others see them. Lacan 75-81. This means identity is not fixed, but is formed through being seen. Origins of gaze theory, Freud and Lacan. Gaze theory began with the work of Sigmund Freud, a famous psychologist. Freud believed that human behavior is shaped by unconscious desires, especially related to love, power, and sex. Freud 3. He studied how children develop their identities through relationships with their parents. One of his key ideas was the Oedipus complex, where a boy desires his mother and sees his father as a rival. This complex helps explain how we learn gender roles as kids. Later, French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan built on Freud's ideas. Lacan introduced the concept of the mirror stage, which happens when babies are about 6 to 18 months old. At this stage, a baby sees its reflection in the mirror and thinks, "That is me." This moment is important because it shows how identity starts with seeing oneself from the outside. But the baby does not understand that the image is just a reflection. It believes the image is whole and strong, even though in real life, the baby is still helpless. Lacan said that from this point on, people keep trying to see themselves as others see them. This creates the gaze, the feeling that someone, or society, is watching us and judging us. Lacan 79. The gaze, therefore, is not just about looking. It is about how we form our identity based on being looked at. As Sturken and Cartwright explain, the gaze is a form of power. To look is to have control. To be looked at is to be judged or objectified. 14. The male gaze, Laura Mulvey's contribution. One of the most famous uses of gaze theory comes from feminist film critic Laura Mulvey. In her 1975 essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, she introduced the idea of the male gaze, Mulvey 11. Mulvey argued that most Hollywood films are made from a man's point of view. In these films, Women are shown as objects of desire. Their bodies are filmed in sexy or romantic ways, while men are shown as active heroes. In her famous 1975 essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, film theorist Laura Mulvey applied this idea to cinema. Mulvey argued that in films, women are often shown as objects for the male viewer to look at. This is called the male gaze. She explained that the camera, the male characters, and even the audience often watch women as passive objects of desire, while men are portrayed as active subjects. Mulvey, 19. This concept has since been used beyond film, especially in literature, to show how gender roles are shaped by observation. For example, think of action movies where a hero enters a room and the camera slowly moves over a woman's body, from her legs to her face. This shot is not from the woman's point of view. It is from the man's or the male audience's perspective. The woman becomes a spectacle to be looked at, while the man drives the story. Mulvey, 19. Mulvey said this teaches audiences, male and female, to see women as things, not as full people. This male gaze does not only exist in films. It appears in ads, music videos, and social media. A woman may feel pressure to look attractive because she knows she is being watched. As Mulvey wrote, in a world ordered by sexual imbalance, pleasure in looking has been split between active male and passive female. 11. This means men are taught to look, and women are taught to be looked at. Other types of gaze. While the male gaze is the most famous, other types of gaze show how power works in society. The colonial gaze. The colonial gaze refers to the way Western cultures view non-Western people as exotic, primitive, or inferior. For example, old travel books and films often showed African or Asian people as savages or mysterious natives. This gaze helped justify colonialism when powerful countries took over weaker ones. As Edward Said explained in his book Orientalism, Western artists and writers created false images of the East to make it seem like they needed to be controlled. Side 45. The colonial gaze still exists today, in movies and news stories that stereotype people from developing countries. The medical gaze. Michel Foucault talked about the medical gaze, how doctors look at patients' bodies to find what is wrong. Foucault, 104. In hospitals, patients are often treated like cases, not people. Their pain, emotions, and backgrounds may be ignored. The medical gaze gives doctors power over patients. It also defines what is normal or abnormal based on science, which may not always be fair. The oppositional gaze. Black feminist scholar Bell Hooks introduced the oppositional gaze as a way for marginalized people to fight back. Hooks, 115. She said that black women were often told not to look directly at white people, especially during slavery and segregation in the U.S. Looking could be seen as disrespectful or dangerous. But Hooks argued that the ability to look, especially to look back with resistance, is a form of power. When a black woman watches a movie that stereotypes her, she can use the oppositional gaze to criticize it, not accept it. The gaze in everyday life. Gaze theory is not just for analyzing films and books. It helps us understand real-life experiences. For example, A person wearing a hijab may feel watched in public, as others stare or make assumptions about her religion. Ahmed 210. This is a form of the racialized gaze or Islamophobic gaze. B. In the classroom, students may change their behavior when the teacher is watching. The teacher's gaze creates discipline. Foucault, 170. C. On social media, people often pose for photos to be liked and admired. The Instagram gaze encourages people to present a perfect image of themselves. Retberg, 78. All of these examples show that looking is not natural or neutral. It is shaped by culture and power. Criticisms and limitations. Some scholars say gaze theory has limits. For example, not all men enjoy the male gaze, and not all women feel objectified. People have different experiences based on class, race, disability, and sexuality. Mendable 32. Also, today's media includes more diverse voices. Shows like Pose or Never Have I Ever offer different kinds of gazes, queer gazes, South Asian gazes, that challenge old ideas. Another criticism is that gaze theory focuses too much on vision and ignores other senses like sound, touch, and smell. Feld 56. Some researchers now study acoustic gaze or embodied gaze to get a fuller picture. Still, gaze theory remains useful for asking, who is looking, who is being looked at, and what power is at play? NBSP, RP. Practice. How is gaze theory implemented in literature? The male gaze in literature. Writers often use the male gaze to show how women are viewed as objects in a male-dominated society. A classic example is found in Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, 1847. Throughout the novel, Jane is often looked at in ways that reduce her to her appearance. When the wealthy Mr. Rochester first meets Jane, he studies her closely, describing her as a little rosy dimpled elf, Bronte 132. His gaze turns her into a fantasy figure rather than seeing her as a strong, independent woman. However, Jane pushes back. She refuses to be just an object of his gaze, demanding equality and respect. This struggle shows that the male gaze is not always accepted. Jane speaks directly to the reader, creating what scholars call a female voice. Her narration allows her to control how she is seen, challenging the male gaze. Mackinnon 56. In this way, Bronte uses gaze not just to show oppression, but also resistance. Another example appears in F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, 1925. Daisy Buchanan is constantly observed by men, by Gatsby, Tom, and even Nick, the narrator. Gatsby idealizes her, staring at her house across the bay and dreaming of a perfect reunion. But this gaze is not about Daisy as a person. It is about Gatsby's fantasy of wealth, beauty, and status. As scholar Ruth Pergozzi notes, Daisy becomes less a woman and more a symbol, Pergozzi 228. The male gaze turns women into symbols, stripping them of their real feelings and desires. The female gaze and other perspectives. While the male gaze is the most discussed, scholars have also explored the female gaze. This refers to how women see and represent the world, especially men and other women. In Alice Walker's The Color Purple, 1982, the protagonist Celie tells her story through letters. She describes how men have hurt her, and how women, especially her friend Shug, have helped her grow stronger. Celie's gaze starts as fearful and passive, but it becomes powerful and loving. When she says, "I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field and don't notice it," she shows a gaze full of wonder and care. Walker 199. Here the female gaze is not sexual or controlling, but nurturing. Celie sees beauty in simple things and in other people. Her gaze helps her reclaim her identity after years of abuse. This is different from the male gaze, which often controls or judges. As scholar Amelia Horgan explains, the female gaze can be about connection, not conquest. Horgan 34. Other forms of the gaze include the colonial gaze and the racial gaze. In Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, 1899, European characters often look at African people as less than human. They describe Africans in animal-like terms, turning them into objects of fear or pity. This reflects the colonial mindset of the time, where European powers believed they were superior and had the right to rule others. Said 21. Edward Said's concept of Orientalism explains how Western writers portray Eastern or non-Western people as exotic or dangerous. These images are shaped by the Western gaze. Said 36. Other forms of the gaze. In many stories, the gaze is linked to power. Whoever controls the gaze often has control over the story. In George Orwell's 1984, the government watches everyone through cameras and posters that say, "Big Brother is watching you." This surveillance gaze creates fear and obedience. People stop thinking freely because they know they are always being seen. Orwell 4. The gaze becomes a tool of control. Similarly, in Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, 1985, women are watched by eyes, aunts, and other women. Offred, the main character, says, "I avoid looking down at my body, not because it's shameful or faulty, but because I don't want to see it." Atwood, 63. Her body is no longer hers. It is watched and used by the state. Atwood shows that being constantly watched can make people lose their sense of self. Foster, 71. Conclusion. Gaze theory helps us understand how looking and being looked at shape our lives. From Lacan's mirror stage to Mulvey's male gaze, this theory shows that vision is connected to identity, emotion, and power. It teaches us to question who gets to look, who is seen as an object, and how media and culture influence these roles. By learning about different gazes, colonial, medical, oppositional, we can become more aware of inequality and work toward fairness. For students, gaze theory is a tool to think critically about films, ads, social media, and daily interactions. As we learn to see the gaze, we gain power to see and change the world differently. Gaze theory helps us understand how looking and being looked at affect characters in literature. From the male gaze, which turns women into objects, to the female gaze, which can express care and strength, the way characters see each other reveals deeper truths about society. The gaze is not neutral. It shows who has power and who is controlled. Authors use the gaze to explore issues like gender, race, and freedom. By studying the gaze, readers can better understand not only the characters, but also the world the author is criticizing or imagining. For readers, learning about gaze theory opens new ways to read stories. It teaches us to ask, who is looking? Who is being looked at? What does this say about power and identity? By asking these questions, we become more thoughtful readers and thinkers. Thank you.